Welcome to another conversation with the candidates. My name is Kevin Tocci. I'll be here with you for this segment. You may or may not know this, but town elections in both Hanson and Whitman are Saturday, May 20th. If you're not sure as to your voting status or the hours or any information when it comes to the election ballot, contact your local town clerk's office. What we've been doing is interviewing candidates in regards to offices they're seeking, the May 20th ballot. Today we are speaking with candidates from the Board of Selectmen race. Today we have Rosemary Connolly who is joining us. Rosemary.
Hi.
Welcome to the program.
How are you? Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. For those who may or may not know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Rosemary Connolly and I have, this is the camera. My name is Rosemary Connolly and I have been on your finance committee for some time now. I think I'm going on my 6th or 7th year. I have been instrumental in pushing a lot of aid and support for our town forward, reviewing what sort of monies are outside of the taxation process to give us more support so that we can have services without burdening taxpayers. I think now more than ever we'll be facing some challenges, and I think my skills would be needed on the Board of Selectmen.
Why have you decided to run for Board of Selectmen? What is it about the office that you're seeking?
Well, that's funny. I run every year. I think you know that. And part of the reason is people have busy lives and they often aren't paying attention to how things are run in town. And you get this one period in which they pause for a second and they watch board of races, political races. So a part of the reason that I run is to put forward options and things that have been ignored, particularly when it pertains to aid. When Finance Committee pushes it forward or we look at it, it helps make it happen faster. It holds selectmen accountable and brings up options for the taxpayer to make sure that we're maximizing every penny that they have and giving them the best service at the same time.
What is the role of a selectman or a select person?
That's, I guess if you were to define the role, there would be the direction in which our community goes. They sort of determine if we're going to plan a trip. The role of the selectman would say, we're going to Florida. You know, this is where we're going. We're going to Florida because it's nice and warm, and you know, and we'll need all these things to pack. And then on Finance Committee, we'll go, okay, is that a feasible trip? And we'd look at, would be in charge of getting gas. Okay, where can we get the best price for gas? Is this achievable? And what kind of time frame are we looking for? So that kind of balance of the funds, the ability to pull funds, and how to do things to move forward in a long-term way is the Finance Committee's review. And then we give recommendations to the town about that trip you want to take. Probably couldn't take that trip right now, or this is a smart trip to take because we'll have these things. Do you understand what I'm saying? If we put it in the context of planning a family vacation, in a sense.
Using an analogy of sorts.
Always using the analogy of a trip.
Okay.
So they would plan the direction of the town and put that forward to the voter. Ultimately, all in our type of government, in a town meeting government, the people make that decision. So everything finally goes to the people, and with all the information from finance to benefits go there.
Is there an issue, a set of issues at the center of this year's town election?
At the center of this year's town election, I think changes in the law kind of scare me. The economics, we're having a downturn in employment. The home values are starting to decrease, and we have 2 large buildings that we need to build because we've neglected capital. But there's something that we're not talking about, is that we have a rising senior demographic. I'm about to be in that demographic as well. So at 51, looking forward to, when 40% of this town needs senior services, we have a very small senior center that isn't at the for the senior population now isn't able to service. So how are we going to be able to afford a new senior center? So getting creative about that, utilizing all of our buildings effectively, looking at different options on maximizing our dollar through how we liquidate old property and how we procure things is going to be sort of where I go with things.
Okay. Let's talk about the town's budget season. How do you feel the town's finances are at this point?
Well, at this point, I think the taxpayers don't get the support they need. I think we don't get the aid. We're not utilizing aid, and when we do get aid, in the past, I think we had $4.5 million diverted over to a wealthier town. A good example, and we talked a little bit about Hanson. Hanson's per capita wealth is in the 40,000s, and we're in the 30,000s. So, that it was reasonable to say Hanson can't afford something and ask it of a poorer community, and then not recognize that $4.5 million that we had already paid over and above through the improper placement of aid. Not following the contract. In that contract law, it says if the law changes, the assessment changes. We did not follow the contract, so Whitman taxpayers were not protected even though they had a contract. So being really diligent about reading those contracts, understanding how that aid is supposed to be implemented, will allow us to have the services without really negatively impacting citizens, particularly if 40% of our senior population in the next 10 years is going to be seniors with fixed income. We have to know how to use state aid. There is an aversion to applying state aid, and I've had a lot of questions. I was up at the State House Thursday asking a lot of questions to different people about this, and one of the biggest things they brought up is, well, state aid comes with accountability. If you accept state aid, you have to be accountable. So people who don't want to be accountable might have an aversion to state aid. And we're going to look at a good example is hold harmless aid. Hold harmless aid is stabilizing aid for schools. It's not aid that you get to support, it's aid that you're stabilizing. You should only be in a hold harmless state for a short period of time according to the national school budget reviews. You shouldn't be in an elongated state of hold harmless. We've been in hold harmless for 20 years. We've had situations in which, we could have last year, if we had pulled ourselves out of hold harmless, we could have other towns received up to $2.5 million extra. That's the sort of support that the taxpayers need to have a good school system. That good school system supports the value of your home, the equalized value, and it makes borrowing money cheaper. Right now, the interest rate is high and is about to get higher. These are the smart decisions that people have to make. Now, there's a history here. There's a history on why people how this all started, and maybe when it first started it was smart, but let's take you back about 30 years ago, right around Proposition 2.5, or actually more, 35 years before Proposition 2.5. The education, to afford education was very expensive. The laws had just changed, requiring towns to educate the child and not just one set price. So most of the budgets were going towards education at that time.
They still are.
Percentage-wise, yeah, and there's a reason for that structure. Mm-hmm. That structure goes like this. Federal takes care of military. State generally takes care of healthcare, and towns take care of the intimate things, like caring for children and families and seniors. Those are the intimate things. They leave those intimate tasks. So it would be reasonable that 50% of that budget, much like I think it's 80% of the federal budget is military. It's reasonable that the responsibility of those budgets lie, the majority of the costs of those intimate things. So to finish off what I was going to say, yes, they still are, but they aren't the 80 to 70% they were. So what they did is they created an aggregate model, and they said education should be for everybody. It is our job to have a workforce that is competitive, and every town is responsible for putting forward future Americans that are effective. So we then took on this education, but that made it so that we couldn't have police and fire. Brockton Police and Fire started this. The law, Chapter 70, actually. It was right around here that we started Chapter 70. That gave us enough aid, but not quite enough. It still was a little too expensive. I think it ended up being, on average, close to 60% of a budget. Then they went back in 07, and they brought it back to about 50%. And then in 2000, this last one, probably about 48, the last one, it was the Student Opportunity Act that corrected that. There's a lot of people that still don't understand that those amounts have been corrected, and they believe that if you have children, it's too expensive. So a lot of policies were put in place for zoning and other things that excluded families, and I think they call them dissect or zoning policies.
Okay, but let's get back on track. I kind of feel like we've wandered off track. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, please let me, because you need some history to understand this, and if you don't have the history, you're going to make some bad assumptions and make bad decisions that, with these news laws that are coming up, are going to negatively affect us. Basically, different zoning policies that excluded 1 and 2 bedrooms only, and people felt like, oh good, we don't have to pay for kids, but those things aren't the same way. Back in 2002, maybe it was expensive, but after 2007, that wasn't the case. And again, it's been corrected. With the new changes, we can accept aid, and we can have families come and not have a problem. And to show you how effective people have been about doing policies that exclude working families, we can look at places like Haverhill, who have had consistent growth, and most towns 30 miles around that have had consistent growth, that have children, that have families, and then we can look at Whitman and Hanson. And in Whitman and Hanson, we have 2 large buildings that used to hold thousands of children that are gone. So these are exclusionary policies that don't make sense anymore. Maybe they did when they were first started, but they no longer do. And they're exclusionary policies that will end up hurting our ability to get aid and support all of the demographics in our town. So I'm hoping to sort of have an honest conversation about that, put it on the table, get ourselves out of that hold harmless state, which is a stabilizing state, into getting real Chapter 70 aid. Last year we missed out on $2.5 million. This year it looks like we're about to lose out another $2.5 million. We can look at things like opioid aid. We had some of the highest opioid deaths in Massachusetts per capita, but received no aid. Towns like Hingham received aid, and almost all of our surrounding towns did, except for Abington. For some reason, we didn't take anything to support families to stop opioids. It is critical. When 2.5 was put in 30 years ago, that formula was set 30 years ago. The change in expense of running a town has become much more expensive. And without aid, we won't be able to achieve the same services that other communities have. So.
Okay. I would ask you about long-term finances, but I think you kind of might have already. So we're gonna jump over that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the town's in short order, strategic plan and capital plan. Give me your thoughts. I know this is something that's was worked on quite a few years ago. I know that it's something that is fluid and needs to be some form of upkeep. What's your thought on the current strategic plan for the town?
The current strategic plan, so I think when I first got on, I talked a little bit. I worked for a company called DataQuest for a long time, and part of our job was to go into places, and I would get a job and I would assess from the inside what was going on with your company. And it's kind of it's a form of an audit, an internal audit, and it tells you what you're doing good, what you're doing bad with staff, and then we'd take it back to the team and would review everything. So if I were to do this same audit in the town, I would look at the fact that this strategic plan is supposed to be like a SWOT analysis. Remember, I spoke on SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis are what are your strengths, your weaknesses, and they're supposed to determine your starting point. Like, you're supposed to identify what you are and what you're doing. It is so, you're saying it's fluid, but it's not transparent. Nobody's identified where we are. Where we are is one of the lowest invested in education and almost average for police and fire. in Massachusetts, what are the services for our demographics is what we should be looking at. What's our demographics? That's never been talked about. Who do we have to serve? What are their needs? What are their wealth indexes? It's missing. So that I felt had a lot of holes in it, and I question why it has those holes. When you're making a plan, you know where you're starting, and you have a sense of where you're ending, and that's all missing, and that's not transparency.
And as though talking about finances isn't enough, that you want to always have amenities, you want to have the best, whether it's an up-to-date fire station, an up-to-date police station, and maybe even a DPW building. And that seems to be one of the main projects that has not been something that the town has been willing to want to fund. It is something that is a discussion coming up. It's a ballot question. There's also a conversation, well, I know it's later on this year, but a middle school. Give me your thoughts on key capital projects here in the community.
I think if anybody really listened to what they said at the Collins Capitol, the one takeaway from this was you didn't manage your capital well. So, and I've said 100 times, if I haven't said it before, if you haven't heard it, is we've been very penny wise, but seriously pound foolish. So we're about to come into real expense. I mean, you talk about everyone like a new fire station. Our fire station is 100 years old.
But there was money spent in 2007.
Even to refurbish
to refurbish it.
To refurbish it. And I think if anyone's purchased a car, there's a point. I'm not saying we need a new fire station, but you understand the rate of erosion and when you need new. And I think 100 years, it's very good that it's kept up as long as it can. But then you talk about this 100-year-old DPW building. It's gotten to a point where it's unethical to have people work there. And I said it last year, we have people working there, but we never did our due diligence to make sure that there was money put aside. We never courted our state reps for funding. I've spoken to them for assisting. Other towns do that. They go to their state reps, they say, we need help with this funding. We were able to move arches and do those things, that's great, but this is a building that's necessary. When you determine capital costs, you determine how often the public enters that building. And because it's a building that mostly staff does, it has gone such a long time with neglect. What's the problem with building it in the sequence that we have? Well, the problem is, as I said, we've got an issue coming with our EQV. When property values decrease, our EQV goes down. And just like if you're going to borrow and you need some sort of equity, our equity is going down. So that's going to affect our ability to borrow. With all of this capital pushed off right and sort of needed right when we're at a point where it's going to be the most to borrow and the most to build, I think we have to be really creative and know where the aid is and know how to get money outside if we're going to achieve anything. And I'm definitely somebody that's very, very good at that.
Talk about the importance of the middle school, replacing the middle school that the town currently has.
Well, I think people should be aware that you really don't just get right in unless there's a problem. And so again, here we are. Let's look at when we didn't fix the DPW building 10 years ago. It was $8,000 10 years ago. It's $18,000. Not even 10 years ago. I think it was like 5. It's almost double. It's more than doubled, right? To 18 million. Sorry, 8 to 18 million. Well, we are not going to have any help with that building. With the middle school, we're going to have 40% of that building paid for. If we don't fix it, and 40% of that particular building, that money is not guaranteed that we're going to get it back again. So imagine with the increase and the lack of support, how much that building is. So like I said, we're going to have to get really creative about how we do these things because we're just pushing off and creating more expense down the line. Right now is the cheapest point to do something, you know, and we have to get creative. A bigger thing that we're not talking about is the demographic of seniors and the need for a new senior center. We have a building that we're currently literally giving away for $1. We have open space from declining enrollment within our schools, other available places to put service the self-help that's in that building, that has a gym that's closer to testing, that we could still provide the same services, and just shifting people around to a more suitable building and not pay anything really for the seniors to be right over in that other building, which is already handicapped accessible.
Let's talk a little bit about the tax rolls and being able to lure industry and commercial business into town. Do you feel that the town does enough? Do you feel that the Board of Selectmen does enough to be welcoming of businesses, to be able to relocate here? I know it's a bedroom community, you know, a 90-10, 89-11, however you want to break it down between residential and commercial tax base. But is there enough being done to lure businesses to pay taxes here?
Well, I think if we look at a lot of our businesses rely on children and families. And some of the actions that we spoke about earlier about making education not as attractive and watching those declining enrollment, I think if I owned a business that had a dance studio, if catered to children, I'd be really concerned about my clientele leaving the area due to some of the decisions we're making. As far as businesses in the downtown area, it was really hopeful. We saw a beautiful new downtown, but if we're looking at some of the new zoning plans, the new zoning plans are going to put more apartments down there. Even though that was not asked by the state asked us to put them down near the T station. They've decided to petition zoning up near the center of town. I think that will cause serious problems with traffic and make it less likely that people would utilize. I think Brockton had the same problem with Main Street. The flow in traffic will make it less likely would people utilize our beautiful downtown. So I think people aren't being thoughtful, they're being, you know, they'd like to see something but not looking at how that might affect us. Also, not following those new zoning laws, the T zoning laws, will have us lose millions of dollars in aid that we were going to be paying out to redo and re-beautify. We just voted that in, and that's a smart idea. But a lot of that reimbursement aid relies on the fact that we're handling the zoning that the MBTA asked. They asked from a half a mile from the T, and they asked for diverse zoning. And some of the zoning that I quickly read about, it's just being sort of put forward now, actually only caters to 1 and 2 bedrooms, and again excludes families and working families, along with the services.
Okay. Short answer, and that is do you feel Whitman does enough to support the businesses it has?
Well, I just said no. Actually, it's punitive, right? Okay. If a restaurant needs people, and they need people to park.
What could the town do better?
Parking.
How can the Board of Selectmen be in a role to assist businesses better?
I think businesses in downtown should be worried about parking, especially as they bring in more apartments. It's nice to have people walking, but there's no guarantee those people walking will be utilizing it. And people could walk up from the T up to the center. So I would be worried about, we already have a serious parking issue downtown. We already have, I think yesterday I was in line in the center for a long time just to get through the center of town. So I think that is a punitive thing to business. People might be there, but are people going to go? You know, are other people going to enter? You can be within walking distance without being disruptive to the downtown area.
If it was within the town's purview, it's also the state's part of it. I know that the recreational marijuana licenses, the retail licenses, are kind of in line with what you have for alcohol licenses, right?
Yep.
So if there was a way to increase the alcohol licenses and also the recreational marijuana to increase revenue, is this something that you would consider if you were elected?
I have to say that one of the things I said when I was voting for this, when we were voting for it and asked on Finance Committee, I asked, did it have a financial impact negatively, and what do we know what the benefits were? And nobody came in to say anything and give us any information on that. And shortly after that, we found out from the state, hey, it's sort of distributed through all towns, that if you have it, you really get reimbursed only for traffic reasons. So whatever we get, we're going to end up having to put back into correcting the traffic reasons. And all you've done is bring in businesses that people just come and buy their marijuana and leave. They're not really using the town restaurants. They're not using different things. Now, I don't know if it has any different impact, but I know that you build businesses that people in your town are going to use, and they're used regularly. Marijuana, if people use it, some people do, but at the rate more than what we could use. What do we want to be known as? I mean, I think a lot of people in town have this dream that marijuana is going to give us a ton of money. I haven't seen much from Hanson, and that was sort of what was sold. But the conversation of congestion, traffic, home values, that hasn't happened. And our home values, we do have to really stabilize if we're going to borrow as much. And we have to start thinking and designing in terms of who lives here in a permanent way.
Something that has been the topic of conversation, something that was discussed at town meeting, should all municipal meetings be recorded, whether it's visual, an audio component, or both? What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is our government. I run every year mostly because I want to talk directly to people. I want them to pay attention, and I want them to be involved. I want them to have the conversations with each other. I don't want them to have the quick tidbits here and there. I want them to be active citizens. It's really important that people are active citizens. Having those video cameras, something comes up and you go, what's the problem? What people don't know is 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, I sent an email to Frank Lyman and I said, the busing is being done illegally. We need to review it. It shouldn't be done this way. And nothing happened. And it wasn't until Kathy Otina went over it and went back to the school administrators, and she said, we need to review this busing. This is unequitable. Whitman should not be paying 80% of this busing. If people were paying attention to those meetings, it wouldn't have taken 3 years and Kathy and I digging through. We would have had more minds on it. Sean Kane and Galvin came up with something. It didn't end up being something that could be used. It ended up being rejected. But they went back to a more within a range of legal. And Whitman's getting a more reasonable cost for busing now. But if they had been watching, the same things that I'm running on all the time would be corrected. They'd like what we do. And so I love it. I love the idea that people are active. Also, maybe they want to get on finance committee. Maybe they want to join up for something. We have to have an open, true, transparent government. I don't believe that was put forward for an honest reason. I believe it was put forward to sort of pick on somebody or to take one little tidbit that someone says and expand it past something reasonable. But I think it'll do just the opposite in the end. I think people will feel welcome, and it'll get back to where we're supposed to be. This is our government.
You mentioned it earlier, I think in passing in one of your answers, the drug and opioid epidemic. Do you feel that this is something that is an issue? Is this something that's a key issue in a selectman's race? Or just in town government?
I think it's a key issue in every community, but particularly ours, when we have some of the largest per capita deaths. And one of the things and indicators, if you kind of watch, and you can go to the Department of Revenue dashboard, DOR, and you can look at economic downturns. And then you can go to opioid, times in which we have our largest opioid deaths. Whitman and Hanson have some of the largest per capita opioid deaths per person, more than cities. And it happens around the time of unemployment dips. And right now we're about to go in it, and I'm really concerned about that. I'm concerned that we don't have that extra aid to sort of support families and help them in this time. And I do think that we should be putting aside a little bit more money, time, and conversation right now on why are our Whitman and Hanson students dying at greater rates from opioid deaths? Have we not prepared them? Right now this year we had 14 children drop out of school last year, 20 the year before. Those are very high rates. Even though the state's high, it exceeds those rates. And we hear people say, a municipal employee won't have a job. We have 14 people that will never have a really steady employment. And we have not been committed to caring for our individual citizens and meeting them where they're at. and that concerns me. We have to start treating people as if they are permanent residents and not temporarily there. We have to invite them in their own government. We have to have places in which people can meet up and talk and discuss about these things, and I feel like they've been alienated. I have a lot of hope for our new town administrator. Mary Beth Carter is somebody that brings people together, and so there's a lot of really good things happening, and very hopeful about how we go forward. I'm hoping to get more aid, more accountability, looking at procurement, how we buy and how we resolve things to make sure we maximize all that, and make sure that we have ways that we can make sure people are accountable for how they do that.
So would I file that under what would you like to do if you're elected? What would be your goals? Would that suffice?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, because that was my next question, so you might have already answered that by sneaking that in. I'm going to give you kind of an open-ended question. Is there something that we haven't discussed here, but you want to briefly, almost like you're writing your own question and you're answering it?
I'm writing my own question and answer.
Yes. If there's something we haven't discussed, a topic we haven't touched upon that you want to, or maybe something that we were talking about earlier, and you want to maybe do a follow-up or even add to, you can briefly do that.
I just would like to ask people to be involved in their government. I want to talk a little bit quickly about what I started many years ago. This was my 4th year running. And each year it does work. I run, last year was Chapter 90. I ran on Chapter 90, we accepted roads, and we're going to get lots of money, good amounts of money, and the opportunity to, just for 4 or 5 roads, probably about $10,000, $20,000. That's like a few miles. So each time we do accept roads, we hadn't accepted roads for, according to the state, for over 30 years. So we were plowing and caring for roads, but not actually getting the support from the state that we needed. The state aid was something I reviewed. We've corrected that. I want to continue that, but I also want people to pay attention. Give more than that 2-3 minute quick, opinion. Really invest in each other. Invest in each other in starting things in town, starting things in your library, understanding how things work. Watching all these meetings, these newly recorded meetings, and ask questions. That's all.
Folks want to find out more about your campaign, how can they do that?
They can do Connolly for Selectmen on Facebook or rwhitman.com.
I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
And I want to thank you for tuning into a program like this, the idea of a program such as Conversation with the Candidates, or Conversations with the Candidates, is to better inform you as the voter. So when it comes May 20th, you can make the right choices for your community moving forward. Until our next conversation, have yourself a great day.